May 1st, 1969. Fred Rogers was sitting in a taxi in Washington, D.C., heading toward the United States Senate. In his briefcase was a speech, carefully written, rehearsed dozens of times. He was about to throw it away and speak from his heart. Instead, Fred was scheduled to testify before the Senate Subcommittee on Communications. They were deciding whether to cut funding for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the organization that funded PBS and shows like Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. President Nixon wanted to cut the budget in half, from $20 million to $10 million. If that happened, PBS would collapse. Educational television would die. And Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, along with dozens of other shows, would disappear. Fred Rogers had 6 minutes to change their minds. 6 minutes to save public television. 6 minutes to convince a room full of politicians, most of whom had never seen his show, that what he did mattered. The odds were impossible. The chairman of the subcommittee was Senator John Pastore, a tough, no-nonsense Democrat from Rhode Island, known for being impatient, sharp-tongued, and very difficult to persuade. Pastore had already made up his mind. He thought public television was a waste of taxpayer money. Fred Rogers was about to change his life. To understand what Fred was walking into, you need to understand 1969 America. The country was on fire. The Vietnam War was raging. Protests in the streets, riots, assassinations. Martin Luther King Jr. had been killed the year before. Robert Kennedy had been killed 2 months after that. The nation was violent, angry, divided. And President Richard Nixon's administration had decided that public television shows like Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, Sesame Street, educational programming was not a priority. They wanted to cut funding in half. The argument was simple. We're at war. We need that money for defense. Educational TV is a luxury we can't afford. On May 1st, 1969, the Senate Subcommittee on Communications held hearings to decide whether to approve Nixon's cuts. Several people testified that day. PBS executives, producers, advocates. They gave passionate speeches about the importance of public television, about reaching underserved communities, about educational programming for children. Senator Pastore listened politely, but he was unmoved. He'd heard it all before. Vague promises, grand statements about the power of television and reaching children. He was tired of it. Then Fred Rogers was called to testify. Fred walked into the hearing room. It was intimidating. A large, formal Senate chamber. High ceilings. Senators sitting at an elevated bench, looking down at witnesses. Fred sat at a small table facing them, alone. There was a microphone in front of him, a pitcher of water. His prepared statement. Senator Pastore, a man in his 60s, with sharp eyes and an impatient demeanor, looked down at Fred. All right, Mr. Rogers, you have 6 minutes. Fred nodded. Thank you, Senator. He started to read from his prepared statement. It was formal, polite, full of statistics about PBS reach and educational impact. After about 30 seconds, Pastore interrupted. Mr. Rogers, would it make you happy if you read that whole thing? Fred looked up, startled. I'd just like you to talk about what you believe in, Pastore said. His tone wasn't kind. It was impatient, almost dismissive. I think it's a lot more important. I've read your statement. It's part of the record. I'd like to know what makes you feel that this is so important. Fred set his papers down. This was the moment. He could try to keep reading the prepared, safe, political speech, or he could do what he always did. Be honest. Be real. Speak from the heart. Fred took a breath. Senator Pastore, this is what I believe. And then he began to speak. I give an expression of care every day to each child, to help him realize that he is unique. I end the program by saying, you've made this day a special day, by just your being you. There's no person in the whole world like you. And I like you just the way you are. And I feel that if we in public television can only make it clear that feelings are mentionable and manageable, we will have done a great service for mental health. Fred's voice was calm, gentle, but absolutely sincere. He wasn't performing. He wasn't trying to persuade. He was simply telling the truth about what he did. Senator Pastore was watching him, not interrupting, just listening. Fred continued, I think that it's much more dramatic that two men could be working out their feelings of anger, much more dramatic than showing something of gunfire. I'm very much concerned, as I know you are, about what's being delivered to our children in this country. And I've worked in the field of child development for 6 years now, trying to understand the inner needs of children. He paused, then said something that would become legendary. We deal with such things as the inner drama of childhood. We don't have to bop somebody over the head to make drama on the screen. We deal with such things as getting a haircut, or the feelings about brothers and sisters, and the kind of anger that arises in simple family situations, and we speak to it constructively. Something was happening in that room. Senator Pastore, the tough, impatient, seen-it-all politician, was leaning forward. His expression had changed. He was engaged, interested, moved. Fred kept speaking. I feel so strongly that deep and simple is far more essential than shallow and complex. And I think one of the great dangers we have is going in for these oversimplified offerings that don't really help children to deal with the reality of their own existence. Then, Fred did something unexpected. He decided to recite the lyrics to one of his songs, a song he sang to children on the show. I'd like to give you an example of the kind of thing we try to do, Fred said. This is the ending of a song that I've sung on the program. And then, in that Senate hearing room, in front of politicians and cameras and reporters, Fred Rogers sang, "What do you do with the mad that you feel when you feel so mad you could bite? When the whole wide world seems oh so wrong, and nothing you do seems very right. What do? Do you punch a bag? Do you pound some clay or some dough? Do you round up friends for a game of tag? Or see how fast you go? It's great to be able to stop when you've planned a thing that's wrong and be able to do something else instead and think this song. I can stop when I want to, can stop when I wish. I can stop anytime. And what a good feeling to feel like this and know that the feeling is really mine. Know that there's something deep inside that helps us become what we can. For a girl can be someday a woman, and a boy can be someday a man." Fred finished singing. The room was completely silent. Senator Pastore was staring at Fred Rogers. His eyes were wet. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Senator Pastore cleared his throat. "I'm supposed to be a pretty tough guy," he said. His voice was thick with emotion. "And this is the first time I've had goosebumps for the last 2 days." Fred smiled gently, said nothing, just waited. Pastore continued, almost to himself, "I think it's wonderful. I think it's wonderful." He looked at Fred. "Looks like you just earned the $20 million. The room erupted. Applause, cheers, reporters scrambling to take notes. Fred Rogers had done the impossible. In 6 minutes. With no theatrics, no political maneuvering, no grand gestures, just honesty and a song about anger. He had completely changed Senator Pastore's mind. The hearing continued, but it was over. Everyone knew it. Pastore turned to his colleagues. "I'm going to recommend we restore the full $20 million appropriation." And he did. The Senate approved the funding. PBS was saved. Public television survived. And Mr. Rogers' neighborhood, along with Sesame Street and dozens of other educational shows, continued to reach millions of children All because Fred Rogers spoke from his heart for 6 minutes. After the hearing, reporters swarmed Fred. "Mr. Rogers, how did you know that would work?" "I didn't," Fred said simply. "I just told the truth about what we do." "Do you realize you just saved public television?" Fred looked uncomfortable with the praise. "I didn't save anything. I just explained why it matters." The senators made the decision. But Senator Pastore told reporters something different. "I've been in the Senate for 20 years. I've heard thousands of witnesses. But I've never been moved the way I was moved by Mr. Rogers. He didn't try to impress me. He didn't try to manipulate me. He just spoke the truth about what he does for children. And in that moment, I understood why it matters. That man could have asked me for $100 million, and I would have found a way to give it to him." The video of Fred's testimony became legendary over the years. It's been watched millions of times. It's studied in communication classes, political science classes, film schools, because it's one of the most perfect examples of persuasion in American history. Not through force, not through argument, not through statistics, but through sincerity, through truth, through the simple power of caring about something deeply and being willing to speak honestly about it. But what most people don't know is what happened before the hearing. The night before Fred testified, he couldn't sleep. He was terrified. He called Joanne from his hotel room. "I don't know if I can do this. I don't know how to talk to politicians. I don't know how to be persuasive." Joanne said, "Then don't try to be persuasive. Just be yourself. Tell them what you do. Tell them why it matters. But what if they don't care? What if they've already made up their minds? Then at least you'll have told the truth. And that's all you can do." Fred hung up, looked at his prepared statement. Pages of carefully crafted political language, designed to sound impressive. He threw it in the trash, and he decided to just talk. The way he talked to children. The way he talked to anyone who would listen. Honest, simple, true. Years later, in 1999, Fred was asked about that day. "Were you nervous?" "Terrified," Fred admitted. "I thought I was going to fail. I thought they'd listen politely and then vote to cut the funding anyway. What made you decide to sing?" Fred thought for a moment. "I realized that I was trying to explain something that can't really be explained with words. I was trying to tell them what we do for children. And the best way to show them was to actually do it. So I sang the song. Not to perform, but to show them what it feels like when you help a child understand their anger. When you give them permission to feel what they feel. Senator Pastore felt that. And in feeling it, he understood. "Do you think you saved public television that day?" Fred shook his head. "No, Senator Pastore saved public television. He was willing to listen. He was willing to let himself be moved. That's rare in politics. I was just lucky that I got to speak to someone who was still capable of caring." But there's another part of the story that most people don't know. After the hearing, Fred went back to his hotel room, and he collapsed. The stress, the fear, the pressure of knowing that everything his show, his life's work, the future of educational television had rested on 6 minutes of testimony. It had nearly destroyed him. He lay on the hotel bed and cried for an hour, not from relief, from the weight of what had almost been lost. Joanne flew down to Washington that night, found him still in his suit, exhausted, drained. "You did it," she said. "You saved the show." "I shouldn't have had to," Fred said quietly. "We shouldn't live in a world where something as important as helping children understand their feelings requires begging politicians for money. But we do. And so I had to beg. I'll probably have to beg again someday." He was right. Funding for PBS would be threatened again and again over the decades. And Fred would have to fight for it again and again. But he never forgot. May 1st, 1969. The day he had 6 minutes to save everything. And somehow, Impossibly, he did. The man he changed, Senator John Pastore, served in the Senate until 1976. After that hearing in 1969, he became one of public television's strongest advocates. Every time PBS funding was threatened, Pastore fought for it. He never forgot Fred Rogers. In 1975, Pastore gave a speech on the Senate floor defending public broadcasting. He said, "6 years ago, a man came before my subcommittee. He didn't have charts. He didn't have statistics. He didn't have political connections. He just talked about children, about helping them understand their feelings, about teaching them that they matter. And in 6 minutes, he changed my mind about everything." That man was Fred Rogers. And if we cut funding for public broadcasting, we're not just cutting a budget line. We're abandoning millions of children who need what he provides. I won't let that happen. PBS funding was restored. When Pastore retired from the Senate in 1976, Fred sent him a letter. "Dear Senator Pastore, I wanted to thank you for your years of service. But more than that, I wanted to thank you for listening to me that day in 1969. You didn't have to. You could have dismissed me the way you dismissed so many others. But you listened. You let yourself be moved. And you changed the future for millions of children. That's not a small thing. That's everything. With deep gratitude, Fred." Pastore kept that letter on his desk until he died in 2000. The story of Fred Rogers' congressional testimony is now part of American folklore. It's been written about in books. Featured in the documentary, Won't You Be My Neighbor? Recreated in the movie A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood with Tom Hanks. But beyond the fame, beyond the legend, there's a simple truth. On May 1st, 1969, Fred Rogers walked into a room full of skeptical politicians who thought children's television was a waste of money. And in 6 minutes, without manipulation, without political games, without anything but honesty, he changed their minds. He proved that truth is more powerful than persuasion, that sincerity is more convincing than strategy, that caring deeply about something and being willing to speak about it honestly can move even the hardest hearts. Senator Pastore was supposed to be a pretty tough guy, but Fred Rogers made him cry. And in doing so, he saved public television. What Fred never said in all the years after the testimony. Fred Rogers rarely talked about it. When reporters asked, he'd deflect. It wasn't about me. It was about the children. But once, near the end of his life, a journalist pushed him. "Fred, you had 6 minutes to save everything you'd worked for, everything you believed in. That must have been terrifying." Fred was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "It was terrifying, because I realized in that moment that I couldn't hide behind anything. I couldn't hide behind statistics or experts or prepared statements. I had to just be myself and trust that myself was enough. And for a man who spent his whole life feeling like he wasn't enough, that was the scariest thing in the world. But I didn't have a choice. Either I showed them who I really was and what I really cared about, or I lost everything. So I told the truth. And somehow, miraculously, the truth was enough."